For most of the year, Rathkeale, County Limerick, is a quiet market town of roughly 1,231 residents, according to the most recent census, going about the kind of ordinary daily business you would expect from a town this size anywhere in rural Munster. Then Christmas arrives, and something happens to Rathkeale that happens to almost no other town in Ireland of a comparable size. The population swells, sometimes to as many as 3,500 or even 4,000 people, more than triple its usual size, for a period of roughly 2 to 3 weeks around the holiday season. That swelling is not tourism, and it is not a seasonal festival drawing outside visitors in the conventional sense. It is families coming home in genuinely large numbers from Ireland, from the United Kingdom, and from across continental Europe, because Rathkeale is one of the most significant year-round bases for members of the Irish traveller community anywhere in the country. And Christmas is when a global, highly mobile community returns to its most concentrated point of origin. Let me walk through what that actually means for the town, both the genuine challenges it creates and the parts of the story that rarely make it into national coverage. Rathkeale's connection to the traveller community goes back multiple generations, and the town has functioned for decades as something close to a spiritual and familial home base for traveller families whose working and living patterns take them across Ireland, Britain, and increasingly into continental Europe for extended periods throughout the year. Many traveller families based around Rathkeale maintain permanent or semi-permanent homes in the town, while spending significant portions of the year travelling for work, particularly in trades like tarmac laying, scrap metal dealing, and seasonal agricultural or market work that have historically formed the economic backbone of traveller livelihoods. Christmas represents the point in the calendar when the widest possible number of extended family members, from wherever their work and travel has taken them that year, return to Rathkeale specifically, producing the dramatic, well-documented population surge that local businesses and Gardaí prepare for as a predictable annual event rather than a surprise. Here is where the honest part of this story requires care, because Rathkeale has, for years, attracted a specific kind of national media attention that focuses disproportionately on the more sensational aspects of this population surge, particularly extravagant Christmas homecoming celebrations and, at times, tension or minor public order concerns connected to the scale of the temporary population increase. That coverage is not entirely without basis. Local Gardaí do increase their presence in the town during the Christmas period, specifically to manage the practical challenges of a rural town's infrastructure, roads, parking, and public services, absorbing a population increase of this scale over a genuinely short window of time. But that coverage also frequently flattens a far more complicated and, in several respects, more sympathetic underlying story into a much simpler and less generous narrative. The traveller community in Ireland faces well-documented and persistent challenges around education access, employment discrimination, and health outcomes, challenges that predate and extend well beyond Rathkeale specifically, and the Irish government reports and independent research bodies have repeatedly identified as requiring targeted, sustained policy attention rather than the kind of periodic, sensationalised media coverage that towns like Rathkeale have historically received. Educational attainment rates among traveller children have historically lagged considerably behind the national average, a gap that community organisations and successive government initiatives have worked to address with mixed but gradually improving results over the past 2 decades. Employment discrimination against traveller ethnicity, formally recognised as a distinct ethnic group by the Irish state in 2017, remains a documented and ongoing issue across multiple sectors of Irish working life. A recognition that itself only came after decades of advocacy, specifically because the community had for so long been treated as a social category rather than a distinct ethnicity deserving the same protections applied to other minority groups. Rathkeale itself, outside the specific Christmas period that draws most outside attention, functions as a fairly ordinary rural Irish market town for the rest of the year, with a permanent population going about permanent, largely unremarkable daily life, a fact that gets lost almost entirely in coverage that only ever seems to arrive in late December. Here is the specific, confirmed piece of investment that brings this story into more current focus. In 2024, Rathkeale received funding of €207,000 through the Town and Village Renewal Scheme, a national programme administered by the Department of Rural and Community Development, specifically designed to fund small-scale infrastructure and public realm improvements in towns and villages across rural Ireland. The specific project funded in Rathkeale focused on upgrading key community facilities, including internal improvements to the town's community centre and roof repairs to local youth spaces, addressing long-standing needs for better communal infrastructure serving the town's permanent residents year-round. €207,000 is not, in the context of national infrastructure spending, an enormous sum. It sits at a genuinely modest scale compared to the multi-million and in some cases billion-euro infrastructure investments explored in other towns across this channel. But the funding matters precisely because of what it represents rather than its raw scale. A rural town, regardless of the unusual and sometimes sensationalised media attention it periodically attracts, receiving the same kind of ordinary, unglamorous infrastructure investment that towns of comparable size receive right across the country, funded through the same national scheme, assessed against the same criteria, for entirely conventional reasons having nothing to do with the aspects of Rathkeale's identity that tend to dominate outside coverage. That distinction is worth sitting with directly because it says something meaningful about how a town's national reputation can diverge sharply from its actual day-to-day administrative and civic reality. Rathkeale Town and Village Renewal funding was assessed, approved and delivered through entirely standard government channels, based on entirely standard criteria around community infrastructure and public realm improvement. The same process that funds similar projects in towns with no unusual media profile whatsoever. The town's Christmas population surge, however dramatic and however much outside attention it draws for a few weeks each year, has essentially no bearing on how the rest of Rathkeale's civic and infrastructure needs are assessed and addressed for the remaining 11.5 months of the calendar year. Local business owners in Rathkeale, when the subject of the Christmas period comes up, tend to describe a genuinely mixed picture rather than either uncomplicated enthusiasm or uncomplicated frustration. The population surge does bring meaningful economic activity into the town over a short period, with local shops, pubs and services experiencing a significant, if brief, spike in trade during the homecoming weeks. At the same time, the practical logistics of a rural town's infrastructure, built and maintained for a population of just over 1,000, absorbing 3 to 4 times that number for several weeks, creates genuine, practical strain that local authorities and Gardaí manage carefully each year, specifically because the pattern is now well understood and well anticipated rather than a surprise. Here is the honest, complete picture this investigation arrives at. Rathkeale is simultaneously an ordinary rural Munster market town, receiving ordinary rural infrastructure funding for ordinary community facility improvements, and a uniquely significant multi-generational home base for a specific and historically marginalised Irish ethnic community, whose annual homecoming produces one of the more dramatic, if temporary, population swings recorded anywhere in rural Ireland. Both of those descriptions are accurate. Neither fully captures the town on its own, and the national media coverage Rathkeale periodically receives has historically leaned far more heavily toward the second description than the first, often at the expense of the more complete, more balanced picture that residents living there the rest of the year would recognise as their actual daily reality. The €207,000 in community facilities investment will not resolve the deeper, well-documented structural challenges facing the traveller community nationally, and it was never intended to. It is a small, specific, entirely conventional piece of rural infrastructure funding, notable here less for its own scale and more for what it reveals about a town that spends most of the year being genuinely ordinary, and a few weeks each December being something considerably more unusual, more visible, and, depending entirely on who is doing the describing, either more concerning or more remarkable than most Irish towns of its size will ever become. If this look at what actually sits behind Rathkeale's national reputation gave you a more complete picture, please subscribe, like this video, and share it with someone willing to look past a headline. Let us know in the comments what you think Irish towns like Rathkeale need most going forward.